Before we dive into today's episode, I want to tell you about a free 3-act worksheet to help you structure your story. Whether you're a plotter or a pantser, a novelist, or short fiction writer, this 3-act worksheet will help you navigate your material and even begin each new story with a better plan. Download yours at nancypanuccio.com/act. Stop getting stuck in the middle of your draft. Go grab this free worksheet, nancypanuccio.com/act. I know what you're worried about. If I cut all these elements, won't my story feel thin? Well, here's the truth. Depth comes from going deeper into fewer elements, not adding more. Writer Unleashed is for you, a writer who has the story you want to bring onto the page and into the hearts and minds of readers. I'm Nancy Panuccio, writer, editor, and book coach. Each week, we'll explore techniques, mindsets, and inspiration for writing stories readers can't put down. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now, let's begin. Today, we're talking about a problem I see constantly in first drafts, or at least very, very often, and that is the overcrowded story. You know the feeling. You're writing a novel, let's say, about a woman rebuilding her life after divorce, but you've also got her complicated relationship with her mother, her new job at Condé Nast, her best friend's pregnancy, her teenager's rebellion, a potential new romance, a lawsuit over her ex-husband's business, and a subplot about restoring vintage furniture. I know I'm exaggerating, but you get the idea. Suddenly, your 300-page novel feels like 7 different books at once. Here's what happens. Instead of creating a rich, layered story, you've diluted your central conflict so much that readers can't find the story's anchor. They're overwhelmed, but not in a good way. So today I'm going to help you diagnose whether your story is overcrowded or not, and give you a simple framework for streamlining without losing depth. So let's take a look at what overcrowding actually looks like. Let's start with the difference between a rich story and an overcrowded one. A rich story has multiple elements that all orbit around the central conflict. Think of it like a solar system. There's a sun at the center, your protagonist's core desire and obstacle, and various planets that all relate to that gravitational pull. An overcrowded story has too many competing centers of gravity. It's like trying to create a solar system with 3 suns. Nothing has a clear orbit. So here are 2 warning signs to look out for. Warning sign number 1, your summary is a list of incidents, not a progression. For example, when you summarize your story, it sounds something like this. First, she does this. Then she meets this person, then this happens, then she goes here, then this other thing happens. That's a red flag. A well-structured story summary should sound like she wants X, but Y stands in her way, so she tries Z, which leads to a crisis where she must choose between A and B. Warning sign number 2 is you can't answer what's your book about in 1 sentence. If you need 5 minutes and multiple threads to answer, that's a problem. If I can't grasp what your story is about when I ask you, that means you have too many competing elements. You should be able to say, it's about a woman learning to trust herself after a manipulative relationship, or it's about 2 sisters reconciling with their family's past. If your answer is, well, it's about grief, but also spiritual seeking, and there's this relationship falling apart, and she's dealing with job stuff, and there's also this whole thing about family dynamics, well, then you have lost focus. So why does this happen, even to good writers? Because the story may be very well written, but it's still overcrowded. So before we talk about solutions, let's talk about why overcrowding happens, because understanding the cause actually helps. It usually comes from one of three places. You're trying to write about everything. You care deeply about multiple issues. You want to explore grief and toxic relationships and spiritual seeking and family dysfunction. It comes from a good place. You're observant. You see how things interconnect in real life. But a novel isn't life. It's a shaped, focused version of life. Another reason is that you're afraid of being boring. You worry that if you focus too narrowly, readers will lose interest. So you keep adding more characters, more subplots, more complications. But the opposite is usually true. Readers don't get bored by focus. They get bored by lack of depth. And another reason is you haven't figured out what your story is really about yet. And that's the most common reason. Sometimes overcrowding is just exploration. You're writing to discover your story. You're writing to explore the depth of your character's experience. And that is perfectly fine for a first draft. The problem is when you don't edit it down in revision. So here's a 3-step solution. These are 3 concrete steps. Step 1, find your gravity well. Draw a circle in the middle of a page. In that circle, write your protagonist's core desire, the emotional thing they want most by the end. So this is not just the concrete goal, it's why they want it. So it's not a plot goal like solve the murder or win the competition or win the love or marry Sue. An internal want is more like to feel worthy of love, to trust her own judgment again, to make peace with his father's death. Now, around that circle, list all your major story elements, the secondary characters, subplots, settings, and any thematic questions. Draw a line from each element to the center circle and ask yourself, does this element directly relate to the protagonist's core desire? If yes, how? Write it on the line. If the connection is vague or non-existent, that element might not belong or it needs to be strengthened. That connection has to become more clear. So let me give you an example. Say your center is to learn to trust her own judgment again. Her new job, does it connect? Her new job at Condé Nast, does that relate or obstruct? Does it help her along to trust her own judgment again? Only if the job requires her to make independent decisions and trust her instincts does it belong. If it's just scenery, if it's just superfluous details, it just doesn't connect and it doesn't belong. What about her best friend's cancer diagnosis? Does it connect? Is it unclear? Unless the friend's illness forces her to trust her judgment about how to help despite others' opinions, it's probably a separate story. What about the new romance? Does that connect? Absolutely, maybe it does. Learning to trust her judgment about a new partner directly addresses her core wound. So you see how this works? Not everything that's realistic or meaningful automatically belongs in your story. You never want to create a pedigree of reality. You want to shape everything in service of the story. Okay, on to step 2. Cut, combine, or clarify. Cut, combine, or clarify. Once you've identified elements that don't directly serve your central conflict, you have 3 options. Cut it if an element doesn't connect to your protagonist's core journey and you can't make it connect, cut it. And I know this feels brutal, but if it's not serving the story, it's weighing it down. So what are some things you could cut? Characters who don't escalate your protagonist's conflict or challenge their worldview. Subplots that run parallel to your main story but never intersect with it. Settings that don't reveal character or advance the central conflict. You might want to combine it. Sometimes you have multiple elements doing similar work. So combine them into one stronger element. For example, are there 3 mentor figures? Combine them into one complex mentor. Are there multiple workplace subplots? Combine the conflicts into one high-stakes situation. Are there 4 casual friends offering different advice? Create one best friend with a more complex perspective. This isn't about making things simpler. It's about making them deeper. One fully developed secondary character beats 4 shallow ones. And then you want to clarify its function. Sometimes an element belongs in your story, but its connection to the center isn't clear enough. So you have to ask, what does this character or subplot do for my protagonist's journey? Then you revise to make that function more visible. For example, you might have a subplot about the protagonist's conflict with her sister. It feels important, but it's disconnected from the main romance plot. So you have to ask, what is this sister subplot doing? If it's showing the protagonist has a pattern of avoiding conflict and accommodating others, maybe that belongs. So now clarify, make the sister dynamic directly mirror the romantic relationship. Show how her tendency to accommodate her demanding sister is the same pattern causing problems in her love life. When she learns to set boundaries with her sister, it gives her courage to be honest in the romance. So now the sister subplot isn't separate, it's essential. Maybe the sister is jealous of the romantic partner. Maybe she tries to sabotage it. Maybe the main character needs to confront her sister in order to have the romance flourish with the love interest. Okay, step 3. Apply the 3-function rule. This is a practical tool. Every significant secondary character should serve at least 3 functions in your story. Now, by function, I mean plot function. They create an obstacle, they provide information, or they open a door. They have a character function. They reveal something about the protagonist we wouldn't otherwise see. So they show us a different side of your main character. And then there's thematic function. They embody or challenge a key idea in your story. If a character only serves one function, they're probably too thin to justify the page time. Either deepen them or cut them and give their function to an existing character. For example, a weak secondary character could be the protagonist's coworker who appears in 3 scenes to give workplace advice. The function is to provide information about office politics. That's it. One function. That may not be enough, though, but a strong secondary character, the protagonist's coworker who provides information about office politics, that's the plot function, challenges the protagonist's tendency to avoid conflict, so that's a character function, and represents the kind of confident woman the protagonist wants to become. That's the thematic function. So now that character is pulling some serious narrative weight. Another example, let's say you're writing a contemporary novel about a woman dealing with her mother's declining health. Your first draft has 6 major characters: the protagonist, her mother, 2 siblings, her husband, and a childhood friend who reappears. It has 5 subplots: the mother's Alzheimer's, the protagonist's marriage falling apart, her brother's gambling addiction, her sister's fertility struggles, unresolved grief over her father's death, and the childhood friend offering a potential affair. And then it has multiple settings across 3 different cities. So let's say the manuscript is 350 pages and readers keep asking, well, what's this book really about? What can I hold on to here? What's the anchor? So you identify the core journey, learning to accept that she can't fix or control everything, especially the people she loves. Then you test every element against that center. So what you keep, the mother's Alzheimer's, this is the central event that forces the protagonist to face powerlessness. The husband in the failing marriage shows her pattern of trying to manage and fix rather than allow. And one sibling, you combine the brother and sister into one sister, let's say, dealing with addiction. What you cut is the other sibling entirely, or the childhood friend and potential affair. That adds drama without deepening the theme. You can cut the father's death backstory. Interesting, but actually a different book about grief. What you clarify is the sister's addiction becomes a parallel to the mother's decline, another situation the protagonist tries to fix and can't. The marriage problems aren't a separate issue. They're directly caused by the protagonist's inability to stop controlling and just be present. So you reduce 3 cities to 1 with the mother's former home as the only other significant location. The revised manuscript is now, let's say, 260 pages, and it has a clear emotional through line. You always want to go for depth versus breadth. I know what you're worried about. If I cut all these elements, won't my story feel thin? Well, here's the truth. Depth comes from going deeper into fewer elements, not adding more. So a story about one fully explored relationship is richer than a story about 5 surface-level relationships. A novel that deeply examines one thematic question is more satisfying than a novel that glances at 10 themes. Instead of 5 friends who each appear twice, have one best friend who appears 10 times and evolves throughout the story. Instead of 10 different locations, pick 3 that have thematic significance and return to them at different points so they accrue meaning. Weave your themes into the central conflict instead of creating philosophical detours. So here's what you can do this week. First, identify your protagonist's core internal desire. Write it down in one sentence. Second, list all major characters, subplots, and settings in your story. And third, for each element, ask if it directly connects to that core desire. If you can't draw a clear line, well, you may want to cut it or make that connection more clear. And fourth, for everything that doesn't clearly connect, decide, can I cut it? Can I combine it with something else? Can I clarify its function to strengthen the connection? And fifth, you have to make tough choices. Cut at least 20% of your secondary characters and at least one subplot that doesn't directly serve your main character's journey. Now, this will hurt. You'll feel like you're losing good material. But I promise your story will be stronger and more emotionally powerful when it has a tight gravity while pulling everything together. And it's not like you're throwing it away. You could put it in a different file, save it for later. Maybe it belongs in another story. So cut it, put it in an outtake file, and if the story holds up without it, you will know. You can always put it back. So overcrowding is one of the most common problems I see in ambitious first drafts. It comes from really good instincts. You want to write something rich and complex, but complexity without focus is just chaos. The goal isn't to make your story simpler, it's to make it clearer, to create a strong enough center that everything orbits around with purpose. Remember, readers don't need 10 subplots to stay engaged. They need one protagonist they care about, facing a conflict that matters, making choices that ultimately transform them. Everything else is in service of that. So there you have it. Thanks for hanging out with me today. If you know any writers who need some support in their writing, please share this episode or the Writer Unleashed podcast in general. And if you love what you're listening to, subscribe on your favorite listening platform. And if you're listening on Apple, please leave me a review. Reading how this podcast impacts your writing truly lights me up and helps me create topics for the show. Till next time, keep writing, and I'll talk to you soon.